morning, everyone. My name is Fred Fleitz. I'm president of the Center for Security Policy. Thank you for coming for this panel sponsored by the Center on why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism and a threat to national security. You may know the Center is a nonprofit national security organization founded by former Reagan Defense Department official Frank Gaffney, who just walked in and he's trying to hide. I succeeded Frank as president on January 1st. Frank continues as our executive chairman, and he's doing a great panel tomorrow on saving the persecuted Christians that I hope that you will also attend. I want to read a quote from Senator Chuck Schumer that he said in July 2017, praising French President Macron for condemning anti-Zionism as a reinvented form of anti-Semitism. Schumer said, "The idea that all other peoples can seek and defend their right to self-determination, but the Jewish people cannot, that other nations have a right to exist, but the Jewish state of Israel does not, that too is a modern form of anti-Semitism," just as President Macron said this weekend. We'll hear different definitions of Zionism today, but for me, it is the yearning and desire of the Jewish people to establish a Jewish nation in their ancient homeland, both a nation and as a refuge. There's an effort right now to dress up supposed criticisms of the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu as just criticisms of their policies, that there's nothing against the state of Israel. This is not right. This is repackaged anti-Semitism. It is repackaged Israel hatred to delegitimize the state of Israel and the state of Israel's very right to exist. I was proud to work with Ambassador John Bolton in 1991. I was at the CIA, he was at the State Department as an assistant secretary, when he almost single-handedly repealed the UN General Assembly resolution equating Zionism with racism. This is what the radical left has been up to for a long time, to delegitimize Israel, to weaken Israel. Come on in, come on in. So it's frightening now that we're seeing that this vile anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel is back and has actually entered the U.S. Congress with the election of two members of Congress who have said things that are at least hostile to Israel, but I think they are clearly anti-Semitic, and there are members on this panel who are going to discuss this. I don't want to focus on individuals or try to bash these two members of Congress. The point that I want this panel to make is that anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel is soaring on the left, and this is a real danger for this country. It's soaring on the left. It is affecting the Democratic Party. It is affecting Democratic candidates for office. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is part of this anti-Semitism effort. There was a bill in Congress against the BDS movement, and all of the Democratic presidential candidates voted against this bill. They voted against a bill that was defending Israel and was standing up against anti-Semitism. This is something we have to speak out against because Democrat leaders are not, and we really need to do something about it. I'm going to introduce our speakers as they come up today. Our first speaker, Scott Perry, is not just a member of some important congressional committees. I'm trying to find my notes on you.
There's not much. Sorry. Yeah, I can do it.
He also fought in the Iraq War and is an Army pilot, and he is someone who really is a rising star in the Republican Party, and he has just spoken out forcefully in defense of the priorities of the Trump administration. And I tell you, Congressman, I am so proud that you're here today to speak out on this crucial issue and to add some clarity. So, Congressman Perry, welcome.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be before you. This is an unfortunate topic that in the 21st century, I can't really imagine that we're even having this discussion, and I certainly can't imagine we're having it on the level that we are, because certainly anti-Semitism has always existed for some reason. I will tell you, I grew up in a single-parent household and my mom was kind of my biggest. Obviously, she was my teacher and my mentor. But we talked about, and I have this affinity and this very keen curiosity for history, especially around the World War II era, and maybe a little before that, about what happened then. And I remember as a kid, we had a bookshelf, and we moved from place to place, and there was this book there that I just, when you're a kid, you can read simple things, and simple things. The book is all white, and the letters are black, and it's not a name that you or a word of a book that you would think of all the time. And it just remembered, it was burned into my mind over the course of time, and the book is Treblinka. And I will tell you, just a couple years ago, I said, "Mom, do you still have that book?" And she said, and I said, "Which book?" And she said, "Yeah, I do. Why?" And I said, "Well, I want to read that, And so, I'm a fairly prolific reader. You have about 4 or 5 books open any time, and I started reading it, and I literally almost did not stop. And you just read, and then you reread some of the passages, and you can't imagine that humans do this to one another. You can't imagine that this could ever happen again. And fast forward, I'm living in the world today where we literally have people that say these things never occurred. They never happened, right? They just disregard that it even occurred whatsoever. And then the fact that you have this BDS movement, open on campuses, and the media doesn't report this. They don't seem to care. So there's discrimination, rampant discrimination in the world, and it's okay for some people, but it's not okay for others, right? And the media really spends a lot of time on their supposition when it's not for the people that it's not okay for. But for the people that it is okay for, we don't say anything. And they belie the fact of world history, of what happened and how it all came to pass. And they're comfortable. The thing is that they're comfortable with it. And you think, can it really get any worse? Like, you see things on the campuses of Berkeley and other places, and you think, how is this happening in America? And how is this happening in the 21st century? And if that's not bad enough, that you have to have resolutions in your state houses and in the federal house regarding this BDS movement. And we could talk about, I've got some statistics here. I don't think people realize. Let me just go through some of the things. The BDS website. They've got their own. They're out there. It's like, we're proud that we're for this. We're proud of discrimination. We're proud of hating somebody because of who they, what deity they believe in, what religious practice they have, and how they were born. We're proud because we hate them. That's them. So in 2018, they pressured Airbnb not allow Israeli settlers to use the platform. Argentina's national football team canceled an exhibition match with Israel after BDS pressure. Just canceled the match, right? This is not the days of World War II, Hitler and Jesse Owens. This is now. Chile's Congress voted to ban products from produced in Israeli settlements. Amnesty International called for an arms embargo on Israel. An arms embargo. I don't think I need to tell anybody in the room what Israel is surrounded by, right? And how big Israel is. Where's New Jersey? The Miss Garden State, the size of New Jersey or smaller. This is Israel, right? And they're not going to be able to defend themselves. We're not going to allow them to defend themselves. The UK Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, voted to freeze arms sales with Israel. This is a democratic nation. This is the UK, another democratic nation, voting to stop arms sales with an ally, and the only democratic nation in the Middle East. 50 Irish lawmakers called for Ireland to stop arming Israel. In Scotland, the Falkirk pension fund divested from Bank Hopam from becoming the first local authority pension fund in the UK to divest. Several cities in Italy and Spain called for an arms embargo to Italy. There's all kinds of stuff here. I could just go on. Adidas stopped sponsoring the Israeli Football Association. The point is, folks, they are proud. They are proud of their bigotry, and they're proud of it. And they're proud of, and they're happy to go out and ask you and other Americans to join. And I see many people of Jewish descent here. they want you to go away. And you know where this leads. This is where it starts. I don't need to tell you where it ends, right? Now, a lot of people might say, look, Congressman, there are always people that are going to hate other people in the world for whatever reason. You don't like your neighbor because the dog barks, they have a different car than you, they live a different lifestyle, what have you. People, this is the rough edges of humanity, and this is how it's always going to be. Why do I care? I'm not Jewish. Why do I care? We have a lot of things to care about. Our national security is at stake. First of all, it's the Middle East, and there's one democratic nation in the Middle East that believes in Western values, and it's Israel. Those are the values that we believe right here in the United States. I mean, that little oasis of freedom in the Middle East, that's Israel. And if we're going to have any impact in the Middle East, and by the way, if you look at whether it's petrodollars, whether it's wars, there's a lot of tax dollars, human lives, humanity, and energy and emphasis spent by the United States on the Middle East. We have a stake in the world. And we can spend even more if we don't have a friend there helping. We can spend even more lives, time, talent, treasure if we don't have a friend in Israel there. That's number one. Number two, I probably don't need to tell many people in the room about intelligence sharing and the intelligence services of the Israeli government. And one of our top military intelligence officials described Israel's intelligence service as like something similar to 5 CIAs. Right? There's really, they are the premier. There's nobody better. And if we're going to count on somebody, we can choose, right? We can count on our friend in Israel, or I don't know, maybe we could choose China or Huawei, right? That's an optimal choice for freedom-loving people around the globe. And then there's the technology transfers, and people say, well, look, I'm not serving in the IDF. I'm not serving in the Israeli forces and holding off the Islamists. I'm here in America where we're safe. I will tell you that your programs, the programs that your tax dollars pay for, the programs that ensure the safety and the efficacy of the lives of service members downrange wearing the American flag are supported by Israel and the Jewish state. In so many little ways, most ways, many people will never ever see. They're the little things and the big things. I can just name a couple, some from reading and some from experience. The F-16 program, singly one of the most capable fighters on the planet, single engine, single pilot, long time aircraft. Hundreds and hundreds of upgrades come from Israeli experience flying the aircraft. F-15 is the same thing. F-35 will be the same thing. We make it better. We stay ahead of our adversaries, who steal our technology, by the way. We stay ahead of our adversaries. We fight outnumbered. Does this sound like anybody else you know? America fights outnumbered and wins because of our technological advantage, among other things. We lose that when we lose Israel. We lose a great portion of that. For me, as an Apache pilot, every day when I get in the aircraft, I put the helmet on. That helmet cost, when I was flying, 15 grand. It's probably over 20 now. Everywhere I look, one of the cameras on the front of that aircraft looks, because oftentimes I'm not looking out the window, I'm looking at the thing over my eye, the helmet-mounted device. There's a screen projected right in front of my eye that I see everything that camera sees. And where I move my head, and where the gun moves on the front, the bottom front, that 30mm chain gun, that's all Israeli technology sensing where my head is in the cockpit at any given moment. That didn't come from America, but that came from our best friend. Folks, this is really, really important. And while you might think, well, look, it's just one-off at this campus, this individual, this member of Congress, think about that. A couple years ago, we were outraged by what we saw on TV at some college campus from some citizen who hated their neighbor. We're outraged by it. That's bad enough. And we said, well, that's happening over there. I'm sure my neighbor doesn't feel the same way. It's going to go away. That person's going to be a pariah in their community. Other people are going to recognize that they're bigots, and that will go away. This is in Congress now. This is in Congress now. We have people openly. I'm sure you're probably going to hear the quotes today. You know, why would the people of Israel be defended about their evil deeds? Right? That's what Representative Omar said. She didn't even think about this. She didn't. If you listen to what she said when asked about it, she didn't apologize. She actually doubled down. Why should you be offended that I called you evil? You should know you're evil. You should. That's essentially what, I mean, it is breathtaking right now. You think about, I'm a conservative and I'm a Republican, and it's not always the same thing, I will just tell you that. If one of us said anything like that about anybody other than the Jewish state or Jewish folks, we'd be run out of town, you would be banished from humanity, right? Steve King, a friend of mine, was pilloried for things he allegedly said in the New York Times. Now, I don't know if you're keeping track, but New York Times, over the last few years, seems to have lost a little credibility as a news reporting organization, right? Immediately, there was no trial. There was no chance for this representative, this member of Congress, to say, hold on a second here. This is how it was said. This is out of context. There's no tape. Reporter can write anything he writes. You're going to strip me of my committees? And they did. They stripped him of his committees, and now he's just a member of Congress trying to find his way without half the influence that he had as a member of his committee trying to represent his district. This lady says this, and she's on the Foreign Affairs Committee where she can question people about the most important things of international relationship with our country, including Israel. She's a representative of the United States who is saying the Jewish state must be abolished. That's a representative of the United States. A representative of your government is saying this and being upheld. Upheld. This is where we are. This is critical that we have the conversation. It is critical that we are outspoken about it. I don't need to tell you, you're reading the same things I am. They are. They are outspoken. They are unafraid. They are unembarrassed. They are unashamed. If something's going to happen, getting the high sign. I got to go vote, right? You know, look, Nancy Pelosi's in charge, which is a horrible thing, and you know, they're doing terrible things to the country, and we're trying to stop them. So I got to go vote. But I will tell you, it's my privilege to be with you here today. I just want to beseech you, as cultural warriors, you cannot remain silent. It's uncomfortable. They'll come after me for this. This is going to be somewhere on YouTube or something like that, and all the haters are going to come. Let them come, right? Let them come. I know who I say. God bless you.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much.
I hope so.
Wow, what a great way to begin.
Thank you.
Before I introduce our next speaker, we have 2 open seats up here. We have a couple over here if folks want to grab a seat before we continue. But we're just fabulous for the turnout here. And you can hear from Congressman Perry, this is really a serious issue. And you can see how seriously he takes it.
This is a good turnout.
Yeah, it's full. It's great. We have another distinguished speaker to address you next. He is Rabbi Yexel Moskowitz. He is with the National Council of Young Israel, a businessman who has encouraged investment in Israel. He also was associated with the Cherna Moskowitz Foundation. I asked him to speak today because I saw him on Fox Business. I had met him earlier, but I saw him on Fox Business give a tremendous presentation with Neil Varney on related issues. And I thought, man, if we're doing this panel, I really wanted to ask Rabbi Moskowitz to weigh in and tell us what a serious threat we're facing, not just a religious liberty threat, but a threat to our national security. So, Rabbi?
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and I'm very impressed with the turnout. Obviously gives me a lot of comfort to see so many people turning up, Jews and Gentiles alike, because it means that anti-Semitism is actually important to all of us, and you guys should be congratulating yourselves for being here. I think that when we talk about anti-Semitism, that we have to realize several things. First of all, the anti-Semitism doesn't exist in a vacuum. When we're allowing for a culture to fester within our ranks and within our country and our society, where it's okay to persecute certain groups and individuals. For example, we see this with the MAGA movement. It's become like an issue that if you're wearing a MAGA hat, then automatically that means that you're a target. And that truly frightens me, because that very quickly that can become a yarmulke. It can become this thing on my head. And when I think about that, I think, like, how are we allowing this to happen? And the truth is that with all the people in this room, and obviously the politically conservative movement, We're not allowing that to happen. In fact, we're probably the most tolerant people on the face of this planet. But it's actually the liberal progressive community that's allowed their movement to become one that is not about tolerance, but about pretty much forcing down everybody's throat their agenda. And when it comes to the MAGA movement, which they obviously see as a threat, then they will go after them and persecute them and make their lives miserable because that they are against them. And by allowing that culture to become a reality, it can very easily turn into a Jew issue. And from my perspective, the Jewish community has been here for a really long time. I mean, there were Jews who were part of the founding members of this country and fought in the Civil War and such. And the Jews have been able to be a major source of pride for the American people and been able to contribute so much. And so the same thing we find, just like we find with the people who are proud Americans who are being persecuted today for being proud Americans, the same thing you will find that once it becomes a Jew issue, that people will start turning on the Jews to say that it's all the Jewish people's fault. For example, yesterday we saw, unfortunately, a Jew, Dr. Michael Cohen, who basically, if I remember correctly, I saw this morning an article by Ann Coulter, who I consider a friend, but she said like he's a Jewish lawyer or something like that. And it's like a little bit concerning because that once you start talking about people like, oh, like the last name is Cohen and this guy turned on the president, so that puts Jews, in a sense, in a negative light, and it puts Jews at risk. So I just think that, like, as people, we have to work really hard to try to eradicate that natural inclination to like point fingers at people and to look at others and try to find problems with others. But in the meantime, we should be accepting and loving and caring and understanding that every single person has what to contribute to society. And the Jewish people have been a tremendous source of pride and contribution to this country. And we cannot allow, just like we cannot allow people who are wearing a MAGA hat to be persecuted, we cannot allow Jews to be persecuted in this country. That's the first thing I'd like to say. The second thing that I think that I'd like to discuss is how we see that from my perspective, the greatest existential threat to the Jewish people in this country is the liberal progressive Jewish community. I think that what they've done is that they've replaced Judaism with liberal progressivism. It's become, practically speaking, a religion for them. And what that entails is that they, in order to push forward their liberal progressive agenda, they are willing to throw Israel under the bus. And what that means is that they're literally willing to throw their brothers and sisters, the Jewish people in Israel, which over 6 million of them, if I'm correct, literally they're ready to throw them to the wolves so that way they can radically transform this country into a communist haven or whatever, or a socialist country, whatever you want to call it. And it's a very frightening thing. And I think that one of the things that is at least like the positive thing about all of this is that, first of all, it creates a situation where we have to start drawing lines in the sand. And we have to start realizing that people look at the Jewish vote and they see like the Jewish vote is 70% voting liberal progressive, and they look at it as the Jewish vote. As political conservatives, we have to start working on trying to propagate a message that those people, they're not the Jewish vote. They don't represent the Jewish community. They don't represent Jewish values. They are part and parcel of the liberal progressive vote. And by being part and parcel of the liberal progressive vote, and therefore when you talk about the Jewish vote, we should be talking about the Jewish vote from the perspective of the people who are still promoting Jewish values, which are politically conservative in nature, right? And that's both Orthodox and secular Jews that are promoting this message. They are the Jewish vote. And when you look at the Jewish vote from that perspective, you'll actually find that it's overwhelmingly politically conservative and pro the what I would call American values, that quote-unquote Americanism that all of us hold dear. And when you look at that from that perspective, you'll find, for example, in the Orthodox Jewish communities and in politically conservative inclined Jewish communities, whether they are Orthodox or not, you'll find that they overwhelmingly vote Republican. And if we're able to work on that messaging that the Jewish vote is actually a politically conservative vote, we could actually work on changing that narrative. And that would be a very important thing, because it would also help a lot of the people out there who are part of our movement who think that the Jews out there are trying to destroy this country, that it will change their perspective and actually make them understand that no, they're not representative of the Jewish faith. They're Jews in name only, but at the end of the day, those who are Jewish and still adhere to Jewish values are actually trying to promote a different message which is in line with our agenda. A lot of people like to talk about how Jews have a dual loyalty issue and they are pretty much focused on Israel. Well, the National Council of Israel, in its preamble to its constitution, which was written in 1909, actually writes that the whole purpose of the movement was to promote Americanism and Zionism. And when you look at Americanism and you want to try to understand what that is, if you look today around the room, the only people who are promoting Americanism is our side of the aisle. The other side have long forgotten what that means. And with that said, to the fact that there's this young Jewish movement, and we see that there's going to be a Shabbat program across the street at the Residence Inn with over 300 young Jewish conservatives, is a source of pride for me for the fact that we are seeing that there is a counterbalance to that perspective. The third thing that I'd like to discuss is also and it really kind of segues from the second point, is that we see that the liberal progressive communities, specifically the Jewish one, is actually pushing and promoting these members of Congress who are literally using their positions on the Foreign Affairs Committee or on the I forgot which committee it was, but either way you have Rashida Tlaib, you have Ilhan Omar, you have even Ocasio-Cortez. They are using their platforms to push forward this agenda, and you have groups like If Not Now, groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, and others that are pushing these people, and what's striking is that although they don't believe in anything that Judaism represents, they're using Jewish catchphrases such as justice, justice you shall pursue, and the world shall be built with justice, and so on and so forth, using it to promote these people. And what happens is that it basically gives representatives like Omar and Tlaib a sense that they are being supported by the Jewish community, and it empowers them. And therefore we have to work really hard to constantly push forward the notion that no, those people do not represent Judaism. And therefore we as the Jewish community and those who support the Jewish community are not going to buy into that. We're not going to let it be okay for someone to say it's all about the Benjamins, because it's not. And it's not okay for Nancy Pelosi to let basically this person come along and make a half-baked apology and get away with it and stay on their appointments, on their committees. It's just not okay. And if we constantly work on pushing forward this narrative with all our strength and all our might that they are not us and they do not represent us, quote unquote, hashtag not my Judaism, then we will actually be able to change the narrative and be able to succeed in pushing back against the onslaught that is coming against us. Thank you very much.
That was fabulous. Our next speaker is a good friend of mine, Daniel Pollack with the Zionist Organization of America. He is a former Navy submariner, and I have proudly fought with Dan. Dan and I have teamed up, the Center for Security Policy and the Zionist Organization of America, to kill the terrible nuclear deal with Iran. And the assistance of ZOA was crucial. We gave this assistance to Ambassador John Bolton and to President Trump, who did the right thing in killing a deal that really was endangering our national security. I'm going to ask our last two speakers to try to limit it to 5 minutes, because I think we're going to have a lot of questions. Dan?
I'll do it. Thanks. Listen, so many of you here are students. I'm going to start with a quick story from University of California, Irvine. There's a program by Students for Justice in Palestine. All of you, if you're not aware of that group, it's better. They're just a horrible campus group, and they're omnipresent at a lot of our universities. They had a program on unlearning Zionism. Now, there's a movement afoot. I don't know if any of you read the forward article yesterday by Peter Beinart. It's difficult to even mention how obscene his article was. It was on the forward, which is generally obscene anyway. It used to be a great newspaper. It was always socialist, but it's really gotten terrible. Anyway, it's become controversial that the idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That's one of the topics of our discussion today. I'll just without going into detail about what they covered at University of California, Irvine, one of the breakout sessions in Unlearning Zionism was over the idea that the Zionist movement is intrinsically heterosexual supremacist. So, I don't know. I'm not sure that's something that you want to avoid. But what is the basis for this charge? I mean, you can say a lot of things about Israel, but it's a place where gay people are very comfortable. They have gay pride things. It's really, maybe they even go too far. I'm not going to be accused of that, but of saying that. But they really are not heterosexual superioritists. What's the basis for this? They cited Jewish holy books. So the entire content of their charge, one of the four main elements of their criticism of Zionism, and the only evidence for this heterosexual supremacist is Jewish holy books, Jewish rabbi quotes, the Jewish religion. It's entirely fictitious that anti-Zionism is not a form of anti-Semitism. Now, of course, there are people who are anti-Zionists without being anti-Semitic. But who are we kidding? That's why I'm so happy to see the topic of this discussion today. I happen to be a Zionist. It's in my job description. I work on Capitol Hill. But I'm also an American patriot. As Fred said, I served in the US Navy on a submarine. And I care a lot about the national security of this country. So in my relatively brief remarks, I'm going to cover, we could talk more about the congresswomen and their actual quotes and how horrible that is. You all know that, I think. What I think people may not know is the national security impact of Israel on the United States. The general, who you guys may not have known, he was also a brigadier general in the Army, in addition to be a congressman. So I'm not sure which one we should give him more kudos for. But achieving brigadier general in the US Army as a helicopter pilot is quite an achievement. He pointed out that the helmet he used, and also the helmet in the F-35, is Israeli-developed technology. There's a long list of such technologies. I don't want to bore you. I think many of you know these things. By the way, I'm proud to see not just Jews in the audience, but I also know some people who are active in Christian circles and CUFI. And make no mistake, as a person working on Capitol Hill for Israel, Christian support for Israel is far more important than the Jewish vote. But Jews tend to think wrongly that we have this influence because of whatever. We all know the congressmen in our districts by name and so on, and we vote. But it's Christian support for Israel that is absolutely decisive. And it's the reason that President Trump has done the things that he's done in office. I can go through the list, and I'm just going to mention some things. If we have time in question time, I can go into more detail. Missile defense, the Iron Dome was developed much cheaper than American military systems are. They're now selling it to the US to help defend our bases. Remotely detect explosives. I mean, I can go through the bandages that save soldiers' lives by automatically applying pressure on the battlefield. Okay, I'm running out of time. So there's more stuff like that. What I wanted to touch on is, imagine for a moment the dream scenario of what I call the Ben Rhodes fantasy world. Okay? Imagine Israel, the anti-Semites somehow win, and we, the United States, don't have the asset of Israel in the Middle East. What would that world be like? Well, just think about it for a second. There's a strong correlation between people who hate Israel and who hate America. Not just in America, but around the world. And in the Middle East, this is so. When President Obama pulled away from Israel, people thought that the Saudis, who didn't like Israel at that point very much, would be happy. No, they were upset. Because if the United States could not be counted on to support their friend Israel, what did it mean for American guarantees of Saudi's national security? What does it mean for Jordan if the anti-Semites would have their way and if Israel would be not present in the region? The stability inspired by the presence of Israel, not just their kinetic military might, which is significant for the region. There are no United States. I don't want to exaggerate Israel's military power, but they do defend themselves without the use of US troops. And in the coming decades, I think it's going to be harder and harder to get the United States to deploy. So in summary, I have more to say, but I'm going to, in respect and cover it in the questions, I want to finish on the same point that the general finished on, the member of Congress. Values is our national security winner. And Israel values, both with the Christians and the Jews in this room, are American values, and they're important. Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry I have to rush our last two speakers, but I didn't want to cut off Congressman Perry. Our last speaker is my friend Jim Simpson. He is a senior fellow with the Center for Security Policy, a journalist and reporter, a prolific writer, and he's going to be our cleanup hitter today to talk about something we refer to as the red-green axis. It also is the title of a book that he wrote on behalf of the Center. Jim?
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My book is The Red-Green Axis, Refugees, Immigration, and the Agenda to Erase America. And I do have a few copies for sale, if you'd be interested. And I'll even sign them for a fee. You know, the rabbi mentioned something interesting about, or was it you, Dan? I forget. I asked a Jewish friend of mine, why do so many of you support the left? And she turned and looked at me and said, why do so many of you WASPs support the left? She's got a point. She's got a point. And you know, really, the more I think about it, it's exactly to the point. Because I've studied communism and the left for over 30 years. And one thing I know about communists, this is true universally, whether they're Jewish, whether they're black, doesn't matter. They're communists first. And people talk about how, you know, so many of the early communists in the Soviet Union were Jews, and so many communists in the United States are Jews. I'll tell you something. They are anti-Semitic Jews. They hate Jews.
Of course.
Marx hated Jews. The Frankfurt School, which brought us cultural Marxism, I call it cultural terrorism, they were all Marxist Jews, communist Jews, came to the United States fleeing Hitler. They were virulent anti-Semites, all of them. And I think it has to do with the fact that all communists, all socialist people are atheists first. They don't believe in God. They despise the whole idea of God. So it's just a natural thing. I mean, I think it's hilarious these days. Anytime anybody criticizes George Soros, people are now accusing them of being anti-Semitic. That's the funniest thing I ever heard of. George Soros, the most anti-Semitic, dangerous person on the face of the earth. But anyway, so, you know, I talk about the red-green axis, which of course is the collusion between the left and the Islamists, and it's something that we're seeing here in this country recently, but it's nothing new. When I talk about the Islamists, I'm talking about in this country the organized Muslims, which are almost entirely Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, they may not share the average everyday Muslim probably does not share their ambitions. Their ambitions are to overthrow this country. And they're doing it through subversion here rather than terrorism like they do overseas. But they are in league with the left. It seems to be new here, but it's nothing new. They've been in league with the communists since the 50s, and in fact, the communists created a lot of the Palestinian terrorist groups that we are very familiar with. So it's not a new thing. And I want to, but here's the question. In 2003, on Al Jazeera, Osama bin Laden said, "He who fights to raise the word of God will fight for God's sake. Under these circumstances, there will be no harm if the interests of Muslims converge with the interests of the socialists in the fight against the Crusaders. despite our belief in the infidelity of the socialists. Now just let that percolate for a minute. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Socialists brought us all those agendas that the Muslims claim to despise. I mean, you might not like the Taliban, but at least they're consistent. When they catch homosexuals, they line them up against a wall and then bulldoze the wall over them, you know? But Muslims believe all these things are bad. And so why would they align with a group that promotes all these ideas? Well, the reason is, here's, occasionally the left tells the truth, very occasionally. And it's usually in private conversations that happen to be overheard. One of them was, leftists said, you conservatives believe in principle. We, the left, believe in power. And when you think about it, okay, I got 1 minute, folks. That's why these two have colluded. The left owns all the commanding heights of popular culture, and the Muslims see that as a beautiful advantage. The left sees the Muslims as the perfect foil, using religion as an excuse to insert their ideology and deconstruct and discredit the Constitution. And what they've done in Israel, they come up with pretexts. They don't need a reason, they just need a pretext. So the pretext in Israel is Zionism is racism. Okay? Now, once they've said that, this is a straw man argument. They know it's a straw man argument. It's a bunch of baloney. But once they say that, now they can say, well, Israel is an apartheid state. And we all know exactly the opposite's true. Muslims have much more freedom in Israel than they have in the Palestinian areas. In fact, in the Palestinian areas, they're suffering. They're suffering under crushing socialist, oppressive policies. And, you know, I did an article about Yasser Arafat a number of years ago, and I found a poll taken of Muslims living in Israel. 70% said they would take up arms if they were forced to go live in the Palestinian-controlled areas. 70%. And so it's really, the left does everything. They turn the truth on its head and then they pound away at it. So Zionism is racism. Zionists are an apartheid regime. Therefore, we're justified in imposing BDS, just like we did in the racist South Africa to destroy Israel. But let's not lose sight of the goal. The goal is to destroy Israel, and the ultimate goal is to destroy America. It's a unified goal from all these people, and all these issues work to the same end. Thank you.
I want to move on to some questions. Before I do, I want to let you know our website is securefreedom.org. We'll have videos of these presentations posted. We have a donate button. This is an important project for the center in 2019. We rely on the support of generous people like yourself. I have already chosen someone for the first question, my friend Debbie Weiss. Debbie has, yes, Debbie has half of her family was killed by the Nazis, and the other half escaped pogroms by the Poles. She is also a 9/11 survivor, and if I had more time, I would have put her on the panel, but I told her I'd have her ask the first question.
And the senior fellow with CSP.
I'm sorry.
Does this work? Is this working? Does this work?
It's a small room.
Yes.
It's good.
Is it okay if I make one comment before I ask the question? Because it wasn't cut. Since there was supposed to be about how this is tied to national security, I just want to mention the Global Counterterrorism Forum, which was started under Obama, his signature piece to fight terrorism, and Israel was excluded. They weren't allowed to be a member, they weren't allowed to participate because a lot of the members were Muslim-majority countries that were anti-Zionist and anti-Israel. That's why it's important to be pro-Israel, to support somebody who has our values. They are fighting the same enemy, and they are the canary in the minefield. My question is, maybe Dan can talk a little bit, enlighten the audience about the effect of Title VI of the Higher Education Act and how its impact on college campuses is affecting the belief system there. And I just want to also add that the whole BDS movement, which is much more rampant than I think was really able to be conveyed, hundreds of organizations across the country, around the world, they're indoctrinating our students. The more we accept that, then the more Ilhan Omar's we're going to find. She's not an isolated incident. It's the Democratic Party, it's other people, and it is a national security risk, as people mentioned, to our values, to our way of life, and that's the tie. So that's my question.
Thanks, Debbie. This is a classic CPAC story. Many people don't even know it. There was a problem in the national security sphere. As we started to get involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, we didn't have enough people who knew the languages of the area. So what does Congress do? They pass law, naturally, that's what they do, and it encourages colleges to train students in foreign languages, especially the ones of our enemies, and to encourage them to use that knowledge and cultural knowledge they've gained in some of your students in your colleges to help the U.S. government. That was the intent. There was monies given to Middle East Studies Department. Any of you want to guess what happened to the Middle East Studies Department? I could go on with examples, chapter and verse, but suffice it to say that it's a total failure. Instead of using the money to encourage students to become experts in various languages and cultures and to use it to help our armed forces, the faculty at these schools receiving monies have programming that is anti-Israel, anti-American, and actively discourages the graduates of their programs from being of help to the federal government. I could go on, and I think you could have, Debbie, for a long time about this. I encourage you all to become educated about it. It's called Title VI. We've tried to get it fixed with legislation. Incredible obstacles. We're trying to censure the professors at colleges. Become educated about it. I'm personally now opposed to all the grants. That's the only solution. The federal government can't do what it set out to do, and we need to end the program.
Another question? Yes, sir. Yeah, please use the microphone.
Hi, so I'm a student at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Luckily, we don't have an active BDS movement, but we do know BDS is on the very fast rise. So my question would be, why does the BDS movement seem to be so attractive among college students?
It's the same reason that everything the left does has become attractive to college students. It's because they've all been indoctrinated into leftist mind think, and that's a big part of it. It's all a comprehensive strategy. You know, we think of, you know, transgender bathrooms. What the heck is going on with that? And what he mentioned earlier about how Zionism is a what did he call it? Heterosexual supremacist ideology. I mean, this is all the same garbage that came out of the New Left in the 60s, who were trained by the Frankfurt School Marxists on how to deconstruct society in every aspect. And so that's the reflection of that. And they're all just jumping on board. You know, most people are kind of like herd animals. If it's popular, they jump on, and that's what they're all doing. BDS, everything, right on. Destroy Israel, right on. They all just jump on board. They don't know any better.
Please come up to the microphone.
Yes, sir.
Which one do I ask for a loan?
Not
Was
me.
that a Jewish joke?
So I wanted to ask y'all, as conservative Jews, what are you doing to combat leftist Jews and their seemingly, there he is. What are you guys doing to combat the influence of Frankfurt School believers, of people who do believe and suppressing ethnic majorities in many countries while fighting for the ethnic majority of Israel?
It's a great question. I think that first of all, we have to establish the fact that we're not doing enough, if anything. I think that the Jewish community in general, the politically conservative Jewish community is not even playing defense, let alone offense. And that is something that I really think that will be changing soon. I think that there's starting to become an awareness of how we're not doing enough. I know that Charlie Kirk with Turning Point USA hired Sophia Witt. They're trying to do something about that. I know that the ZOA also is starting to get onto our Davidson. He's getting out there and doing all kind of great stuff. And I think that the National Council also is starting to revitalize itself, building itself more as a movement. I think that we will see the Jewish community starting to play offense, and I hope that we do it as vicious and as dirty as the liberal progressives do it.
Let me just add, I don't think you can accuse, those of you who know Zionist Organization of America, we haven't been quiet and we haven't only been playing defense. I'm proud to say that the organized Jewish community has castigated us for speaking out. They think too much, so we're doing it.
Yeah, it was not meant to
No, I wasn't
insult the ZOA.
Sure.
I'm Jacob, and my question was about how, you've talked a lot about how anti-Semitism is motivating a lot of anti-Zionism, but do you find any concern at how the Palestinian issue is often used by deeply anti-American countries, deeply anti-Christian, deeply anti-Semitic countries like China or Turkey or Qatar to distract from their own human rights abuses, their own persecution of Christian, or their own persecution of sometimes Muslim minorities?
Well, it's like we said earlier, they turn the truth, they stand it on its head. That's what they do. They're all good at that. That's what they do. It's about all they do, and they pound away at it. And the trouble that we have is that they have the commanding heights of popular culture to insert that message into our mainstream. And we have to be better at countering that message and shouting louder. And I don't know how else to talk about it, unless somebody wants to buy one of the networks, and then we do really well, I think.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm John Desser with the Alliance for Israel Advocacy, and I want to take issue with one thing you said, sir. I do think Judaism is heterosexual supremacy.
But it's Zionism.
My son is here, and at his bar mitzvah, his Dvar Torah was on a parsha in Leviticus that talked about the abhorrence that God has for homosexuality, and he battled his rabbi over it to give that message at his bar mitzvah.
Well, let me just subtly explain my point, though. You are making the point Judaism is, actually.
Okay.
Zionism is not really about that. And the fact that the enemies of Zionism would cite Jewish people like you to castigate Zionism kind of proves that they're not.
Agreed. Okay. So let's talk about what Zionism is. And this is my question to the panel. How can we get local school districts in America to teach what Zionism actually is? Because there seems to be a huge chasm between the writings of Theodor Herzl and the anti-Semitism that he was observing in the Dreyfus trial and the prediction that he made that anti-Semitism isn't going to get any better, it's only going to get worse. And within 2 generations, he was absolutely right, and we had the Holocaust. Congressman Scott Perry seemed to be confused about why anti-Semitism has always existed. Anti-Semitism has always existed because since the creation of the world, there has been a Satan. And Satan doesn't like the promises that God has made to the Jewish people, and he wants them to fail so that he can prove that God is not faithful to his promises. And this is why Satan doesn't like the Christians much better either, because they've been grafted into those promises. So my question for the panel is, isn't it all about education, and isn't it about teaching our kids what Zionism really is about? It's about protecting the Jewish people from anti-Semitism?
Well, I agree with what you said, and that's one reason. Look, that's one reason why we're doing this panel. That's one reason why we're going to put it on the internet. I mean, it's going to be just a small measure to counter this growing bigotry. But you know, we're trying to do our part. We're trying to encourage others to speak out. Anyone else have a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to say something if I could, real quick. So I was going to cover that. You know, Zionism is nothing more than the desire for a people for their homeland. And there is no difference between Zionist desire for a homeland and the Greeks living on Cyprus desiring to be reunited with the Greeks living in Cyprus, or the Muslims in Western Sahara wanting to be separate from Morocco, the Balokis in Balochistan, the Kurds in Kurdistan wanting their own homelands. There's no, and the left supports all these other nationalist movements, everyone around the globe, except for Israel. Right. Why is that? You got to point up the inconsistency in their arguments all the time. You just got to throw them at them because they don't have an answer.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question.
Sorry.
Thank you, Fred, for Rabbi Moskowitz. I'm a Catholic, and there are problems in the Catholic Church, and there are serious problems in the what's called the Catholic electorate, much of which is not Catholic. They're Catholics in name only. And I can make that case as a Catholic without any problem. Say, look, they don't even go to church. And how then do they take this seriously that these are Catholic people who maybe go for Christmas or for Easter, and that's it, and they don't hold the teachings of the church? So my question to you is, since you raised this issue about people who may be culturally Jewish or racially Jewish, but don't adhere to Jewish tenets, Jewish beliefs, how can I talk about that in a way, who can I quote to bring this to the fore? Because I live in Chicago, and there are lots of people out there who are Jewish, and some are really conservative and some are not. And I like to be able to quote something. Can you help me with that?
Before you answer this, this is why, as a Catholic, I quoted Schumer to open this. To quote Schumer saying that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. Because I feel I have no business weighing in on this as a Catholic. I think we should have well, I'm not going to, I don't know if we should call Schumer conservative Jew. But basically, he did the right thing once, and we need to have them do the right thing much more often. But, Rabbi?
But before you do, can I just give my 2 cents? I appreciate both of you Catholics speaking up, and it's in no way, in this country, we don't have a litmus test for expressing political opinion. So I encourage you to speak out on this issue and not allow anyone to call you names, both.
Look, I consider Louis Gohmert a friend. I've sat with him many times in his office, and we've had very lively discussions, and I have many Catholics who are some of my closest friends, and I'll be honest, some of the deepest theological discussions that I've had in my life have been with my Catholic friends. Whether that's unfortunate or not is up for debate. The real thing here is that, first of all, if you want to know who you could quote me. Okay, that my grandfather of blessed memory was very vocal in his criticism of the liberal progressive Jewish community, who were willing to who still are willing to sell the Jewish people down the river to push their progressive agenda. With that said, I think that, and I'm just going back to Louis Gohmert, when Louis Gohmert was attacked in the beginning of the year because that he called out George Soros for what he is, and he was called an anti-Semite, and right away you had that liberal progressive Jewish activist movement, Uri Litzedek, Hitori, if not now, and so on and so forth. They all ran for his jugular to call him an anti-Semite and such, and there aren't enough people within our community who are yet empowered to speak out for him. And I think that the Christian community should be speaking out and defending their own, and I was surprised that they did not. And they should be coming out and saying, look, this is what makes America great, is the fact that for the first time in history, you actually have Jews and Christians who are able to live together in peace and harmony and actually get along. If we look at our history, in Europe that didn't exist. It was a terrible situation, and the fact that I can have Catholic friends, to me, that's what makes America great, and that makes me proud to be an American, that's the reality. And the Christian folks should be able to say what they want, and they should be able to say, look, these people don't represent Judaism. Go down to Borough Park or to Williamsburg and go speak to those guys and ask them what they think about what are their political views, and you'll see a completely different vantage point. And with that message, hopefully, we could change the narrative.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm afraid we got to wrap up. The hour is here. I think we could go on for another half hour. The title of this panel was Why Anti-Zionism is a Form of Anti-Semitism and a Threat to National Security, and I think all of our panelists proved this quite well. So I'd like to congratulate them. The Senate will be having additional forums on this issue. As I said, you can watch video of this on our website, securefreedom.org, securefreedom.org, and I'd like to thank you all for attending.